Have you ever been left behind? In front of everyone, imagine standing at the altar, heart wide open, dress white as hope, and the man you trusted most turns away without a word. Charlotte did not just lose a wedding that day. She lost the future she had built in her mind. So she packed her life into a single suitcase, moved across the country, and took a job as a secretary to a billionaire who spoke more with silence than words. But here's the question. What if a home is not a place you find, but one you build, quietly, with someone who listens? Would you risk your heart again, even if it was once shattered? If this story touches something in you, watch closely. Because sometimes, the softest stories carry the deepest truths. If you feel this story matters, comment 1. If you think it could be better, kindly comment 2. So now, imagine starting over. Not in triumph, but in silence. Not with answers, but with questions. This is her journey of loss, of courage, and of finding something gentle when the world had turned cold. Let us begin. The church bells of St. James Cathedral rang at exactly 10:30 on a Saturday morning. The spring air in Chicago still held a bite of cold, but inside the cathedral, sunlight streamed through the stained glass, tulips lined the pews, music filled the vast hall. It was meant to be a perfect day. Everyone turned to look as Charlotte Hale stepped into view. She walked slowly, her fingers clutching a simple bouquet of white lilies. Her wedding dress was elegant but understated. She never liked glitter or gowns that screamed for attention. She preferred grace, quiet beauty, just like her mother once did. Her father waited at the end of the aisle. So did the priest, but not Daniel Cross. Charlotte noticed it right away. There was no groom standing at the altar. At first, she thought he was late. Traffic, maybe, or a forgotten item. She turned to the wedding planner, but the woman was pale and shaking. A man in a navy suit stepped forward from the corner. He spoke to her father in a whisper. Her father froze, then turned to her, his voice trembling. "Charlotte, Daniel is not coming." The words echoed in her mind like a stone dropped in water. Not coming. Not coming. The cathedral went silent. The guests looked around. Some gasped. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered her name. Charlotte stood still. She did not cry. She did not scream. Her hands did not shake. She simply turned around and walked away. One step, then another. Her dress brushed against the marble tiles. By the time she reached the large wooden doors, she felt the full weight of it. The betrayal, the embarrassment, the deep, quiet grief that did not show on her face, but burned behind her eyes. Outside, the cameras were waiting. Reporters shouted questions. She held her chin high. One of them asked, "Miss Hale, did he leave you for someone else?" She paused, then spoke, calmly. "I suppose you would have to ask him that." That was the last thing she said to anyone that day. She disappeared before the evening news aired. No one knew where she went, only that she did not go back to the Hale estate. She did not collect her wedding gifts. She did not post any explanation on social media. 2 days later, a cab dropped her at the Greyhound station. She wore jeans, a gray hoodie, and a baseball cap. No makeup, no jewelry. She paid in cash. The ticket clerk asked, "Where are you heading?" Madame Charlotte looked at the map. Somewhere far, somewhere no one would look. She chose Seattle. The bus ride took nearly 30 hours. She slept through most of it. When she was awake, she stared out the window. Her thoughts were heavy, but still. She did not replay the wedding. She did not ask why he did it. She simply sat with the silence. And for the first time in years, no one expected her to smile, or be charming, or impress anyone. She just had to breathe. Seattle was gray when she arrived. The rain greeted her like an old friend. She stepped out of the terminal with her single suitcase and hailed a cab. Her voice was quiet, anywhere with a clean room and a lock on the door. The cab driver nodded. He drove her to a modest motel near the edge of downtown. It smelled like bleach and old carpet, but it was quiet, and it was hers. She slept for 14 hours. In the days that followed, Charlotte did not cry. She made tea. She read old books. She walked the city with no direction. Eventually, she knew she had to find work, not because she was out of money, but because she needed purpose. Her degree in business was still valid, her resume still impressive. So she printed a few copies, updated the email, removed the Hale family address, and went to work, looking for work. 3 weeks later, she saw the job posting, Executive Assistant, Westbrook Industries, confidential application. She did not know much about Westbrook Industries, except that it was one of the few tech giants not located in Silicon Valley. Its CEO, Graham Westbrook, was famously private. No social media, no public events, no scandals, just work. That sounded safe. Charlotte submitted her resume with a quiet hope she did not name. She was not trying to rise again. She was just trying to survive. The motel where Charlotte stayed had yellowing curtains and the soft hum of old plumbing. The lamp flickered sometimes. The mattress dipped in the middle. Still, it was the first place in weeks where she felt no one would knock, or ask, or expect anything. Each morning, she woke to the sound of distant traffic. Rain tapped gently on the windows. Seattle rain was not dramatic. It whispered. There was something comforting about that. Charlotte kept her routine simple. She made coffee with a small machine placed on a narrow shelf in the motel room. She wrote in a notebook she bought from a corner drugstore. She did not write poetry or plans. She wrote lists, things she had lost, things she still had, and, slowly, things she wanted to find again. One morning, she sat by the window watching people pass with umbrellas. She sipped coffee that tasted like tin. She noticed how nobody looked at anyone. People kept moving. In Chicago, someone like her was known, watched, measured. Here, she could just be someone. Not a name, not a scandal, just Charlotte. Later that day, she visited a public library. She needed to use the computer. Her old laptop had broken during the trip. She could not afford a new one. She typed in her name, just to see. Articles still appeared. Headlines spoke louder than facts. Heiress, abandoned at the altar. Cross-family breaks off. Merger rumors. Where is Charlotte Hale? Now she clicked on none of them. She closed the browser, logged out, exhaled, then opened a job board. She applied for roles she knew she could do. Receptionist, administrative assistant, project coordinator. She did not care about prestige. She needed peace. On the 5th day, her phone rang. The number was local. A calm voice asked, "Is this Charlotte Hale?" She hesitated, then replied, "Yes. This is Westbrook Industries. We received your resume." Charlotte straightened up. The voice continued, "Mr. Graham Westbrook would like to meet you. Are you available tomorrow morning at 9? She agreed, then sat still for several minutes. Something in her chest stirred, not fear, not quite hope either, more like awareness, like the moment before a storm. She arrived at the building early. Westbrook Industries stood in the middle of downtown Seattle. A glass tower, modern, clean, quiet. It reflected the gray sky. The lobby was calm, no chatter, no rush. She told the front desk her name. A woman guided her to the elevator, floor 31. As the doors opened, Charlotte stepped into a world of silence, not empty, just still, like a museum after hours. A tall man waited behind a large glass desk, salt and pepper hair, pressed suit, slate blue eyes. He did not smile. Charlotte Hale. She nodded. Yes, sir. I am Graham Westbrook. Please, sit. His voice was steady, not cold, but not warm. Just exact. She sat. He opened a file in front of him, her resume. He looked at it once, then looked at her. You worked at Hale Interiors for 4 years. Yes. Assistant to the director. Yes. You are not interested in design anymore. I am interested in working. He nodded once, then asked, why Seattle? Charlotte paused, then said, I needed to leave Chicago. He did not ask why. He folded his hands. My last assistant was efficient, but careless, with confidentiality. That is unacceptable here. I understand. There will be long hours. Some travel. The work is not glamorous. I am not looking for glamorous. He studied her again. Can you start Monday? Charlotte blinked. Yes, good. Human Resources will send the documents. That will be all. She stood. Thank you. He gave a short nod. She left the room. It was the shortest interview she had ever attended. And yet, something about it felt exactly right. Outside, the wind had picked up. Charlotte walked to a small cafe nearby, ordered tea, sat in a corner. She looked at the printed menu, but her mind kept returning to the man behind the glass desk, Graham Westbrook. What kind of man says so little, yet fills a room? What was behind those eyes that never shifted? She did not know. But something told her this was not just a job. It was a beginning. That night, she returned to the motel. She folded her few clothes. She called the front desk and booked only 2 more nights. Then she sat on the bed and stared at the wall. She whispered to the silence, let this be different. The silence did not answer, but it stayed, and sometimes that was enough. The office Charlotte entered on Monday morning was not loud. It did not hum with phones or chatter. It breathed in silence. Every step she took on the marble floor echoed gently. The hallway lights were warm, not harsh. Each desk she passed was neat, not a single paper out of place. When she reached the executive floor, the receptionist stood to greet her. Welcome. You will be working directly with Mr. Westbrook. Your office is next to his. Charlotte nodded. Thank you. The receptionist handed her a small badge. It had no title, just her name. The office next to Graham Westbrook's was minimal. White walls, a long desk, a file cabinet, a phone, a single framed photo of a forest in fall. No one spoke to her for the first hour. She opened her laptop, checked her inbox. 32 emails waited, most with labels like confidential and urgent. She scanned them carefully. Then she began to work. At 9:45, her desk phone rang. Charlotte, come in. His voice was steady, as always. She walked the short distance to his glass-walled office. He did not look up from his screen. There is a file on the table. Red folder. She picked it up. You will need to revise the entire schedule for next week's investor meetings. 3 of them are now remote. 1 is canceled. Another has added 2 new guests. Charlotte nodded. Is there a list of the guests? There is. Page 3. She scanned quickly. Will you be speaking at all of them? Yes. Would you prefer I prepare a standard briefing or tailor them to each meeting? He looked at her then. His eyes, sharp and calm, searched hers. Tailored. I will take care of it. He nodded once. That will be all. The door closed behind her. She stood still for a second, then walked back to her desk. Her heart beat a little faster, not from nerves, from clarity. There were no games here, no politics, no small talk, only precision. She liked that. The days moved forward. Charlotte adjusted to the rhythm. Each morning began at 8. Her tasks changed without warning. Some days she managed logistics. Others, she edited speeches or handled private correspondence. Graham never raised his voice, but he noticed everything. He once paused at her desk and said, "You filed this report differently than the last version." She looked up. "I thought this format made the data clearer." He studied the layout, then said, "You were right," then walked away. It was the closest he had come to giving praise. Still, it stayed with her the rest of the day. He never asked personal questions. She never offered any. But small things slipped through. One morning, he arrived, soaked in rain. She offered him a towel. He looked surprised, took it, said nothing. The next day, there was a folded umbrella left on her desk. No note, just the umbrella. Another morning, she brought in coffee from a small shop she had found. It tasted richer than the machine in the break room. She placed it on his desk quietly. He took a sip, then said, "Where is this from? Third and Pine?" He nodded. The next day, he brought 2 cups from the same place, set one on her desk. Without a word, their words were few, but something was building between the lines. Not romance, not yet, but a rhythm. A mutual awareness. Charlotte noticed he always paused at the window around 4, hands behind his back, watching the city below. She wondered what he saw, what he remembered, what he wished he could forget. On Friday. As the day ended, Charlotte stood by the printer waiting for a document. She glanced at the floor below. Most lights were off. Only this floor remained lit. She realized how quiet it had become. She turned to head back. As she did, she saw Graham step out of his office. He paused. "You work late. I do not like to leave anything unfinished." He nodded. "Most people do not think that way anymore." She gave a small smile. "I am not most people." He looked at her for a long second. "No, you are not." Then he walked away. That night, Charlotte sat on her motel bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about that last sentence. She thought about how it had not felt like flirting. It felt like something else. Like being seen, not judged, not praised, just seen. And in a world that had watched her fall, being seen without pity was rare and precious. Charlotte had worked at Westbrook Industries for almost 6 weeks. By now, she knew the rhythm of the floor, the soft hum of the ventilation, the clicking of keys around noon, the way Graham Westbrook's voice never rose, yet always carried weight. What she did not know was what he was thinking. No one really did. Most executives surrounded themselves with assistants, analysts, and advisors. Graham kept few people close. He answered his own phone, read his own contracts, reviewed every slide deck before it went out. Charlotte often handed him reports directly. He scanned them quickly, rarely said more than a sentence or two. Sometimes, when she stood at his desk, she could hear the faint ticking of a vintage clock on the wall. Everything else was silent. One Tuesday afternoon, Charlotte found him standing at the window. The city below looked washed and gray. It had rained for hours. She waited quietly at the doorway. After a moment, he turned. "You wanted to speak?" "Yes." "There's a change in the funding timeline for the second quarter. Show me." She stepped forward and handed him the new chart. He looked at the numbers, then handed it back. "Prepare a version for the board. No colors, just data." She nodded. Of course. Before she turned to leave, she hesitated. then asked softly, "Do you ever get tired of the silence?" His eyes did not change, but something passed through them, brief, like wind through a still room. "I prefer silence to noise with no purpose." She held his gaze. "I understand." That night, she could not sleep. She lay on her side, watching the red light on the motel's smoke detector blink every few seconds. She thought about what he said. She thought about the silence in his office, and the silence inside herself. She had spent so long in a world of noise, cameras, laughter that sounded rehearsed, conversations full of half-truths. Now, she worked beside a man who said very little, but somehow, she trusted his quiet more than she ever trusted anyone's words. 2 days later, they were invited to a formal dinner hosted by a major tech investor. Charlotte had expected Graham to decline. He accepted, then added, "You will come as well. I need someone I can rely on." The dinner was held at a rooftop restaurant with a view of the city skyline. Charlotte wore a dark navy dress. Simple, clean lines, no jewelry. When Graham saw her, he gave no comment, but his eyes lingered for a second longer than usual. At the table, conversation moved fast. Venture capital, market shifts, artificial intelligence. Graham spoke clearly, briefly, every sentence measured. Charlotte sat beside him, offering notes, dates, references when needed. More than once, guests looked at her with curiosity. "Your new assistant," one asked. Graham nodded. "My most effective one." Charlotte said nothing, but she felt her breath steady. After dinner, they stepped outside into the cold air. The rooftop was quiet now. Charlotte leaned on the railing. Below, the city shimmered. Graham stood beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then he said, without turning, "You are not what people expect when they hear your name." Charlotte looked over. "Neither are you." He did not smile, but he did not look away. She asked, "Why do you trust me?" He answered, "Because you do not ask for it." The next morning, Charlotte arrived early. The door to Graham's office was ajar. She knocked once, then stepped in. He was not behind the desk. He stood near the far shelf, holding an old photograph, a man in a military uniform. Beside him, a boy in a blazer. Charlotte stopped. "I can come back later." He looked over. "This was my father." She nodded. Quietly, "He ran this company before me." "Was he the one who built it?" "Yes. From nothing. After the war." Charlotte looked at the photo again. "I can see the resemblance." Graham set it down. He believed in discipline, order, no room for emotion. She waited. He died 11 years ago. There was no crack in his voice, no tremor, just stillness. "Thank you for showing me," she said. He gave a short nod, then walked back to his desk. They never spoke of it again. But the silence between them had changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of shared understanding. The office was quiet on Friday afternoon. Outside, the wind pressed against the tall windows of the building. The lights in most apartments had been turned off. Only the executive floor remained. Charlotte was finishing a financial report when her phone rang. It was Graham. His voice, as always, calm and firm. "Come to my office. Close the door behind you." She walked in, holding her notepad. He was standing, not sitting. His desk was cleared, except for one small folder. No coffee, no laptop, just the folder. "Sit down, please." She did. He looked at her directly, then spoke with no hesitation. "I need to ask you something unusual, unconventional." Charlotte stayed still. "I am listening." Graham took a breath, a shallow one. His voice lowered slightly. My father's estate includes a clause to retain full controlling ownership of Westbrook Industries. I must be legally married before my 36th birthday. Charlotte blinked. Your birthday 2 months from now? He paused. I had no intention of complying. Until now. She looked at him carefully. What changed? You work quietly. You understand discretion. You have no connections to my competitors. Most of all, I trust your judgment. He stepped back, folded his hands. I would like you to enter into a 6-month legal marriage contract with me. It would begin immediately, end on the agreed date. There will be no intimacy, no public disclosure. It will remain private. Charlotte stared at him. For a few seconds, the room stopped moving. You are asking me to marry you. Yes, for business. Not for love. No. She exhaled, then gave a quiet laugh. Not cruel, not sarcastic, just surprised. This might be the strangest interview follow-up I have ever had. Graham said nothing. She looked at him again. What exactly would I receive in return? A place to live, full compensation, well above your current salary, a separate account to ensure your independence and privacy. I will protect your identity from the press. She stood, walked toward the window, looked out at the city she had come to know. Rain fell in fine lines. The buildings looked like shadows. Why me? He answered without pause. Because you are not looking to be rescued. You already rescued yourself. I need someone who does not need me. Her hand rested lightly on the glass. She remembered the headlines, the cameras, the silence that followed, the quiet motel room, and the calm steadiness of this man behind the glass walls. She turned. May I have the weekend to consider? Graham nodded once. I expected no less. That night, Charlotte walked through the Pike Place market after hours. Shops were closed. The lights along the walkways were soft and gold. She sat on a bench facing the water. In her mind, she listed reasons to say no and reasons to say yes. Saying yes would mean safety, a home, time, not forever, just a pause in the storm, but it would also mean giving away a piece of her name again, even if only on paper, and that name had been broken once already. She folded her arms, then looked up at the sky. I am not the girl who was left at the altar anymore, she whispered, but I am still figuring out who I am now. A voice inside her answered, Maybe this is how you find out. Sunday evening, she called him. I have one condition, Graham replied. What is it? My name remains mine. I will sign as Charlotte Hale, not Charlotte Westbrook. There was a pause. Then he said, accepted. On Monday morning, she moved into the guest wing of his home. The house stood at the edge of a quiet neighborhood outside Seattle. Modern, sharp angles, large windows, no photos on the walls. A house with structure, but no warmth. Graham showed her the wing she would stay in. Separate entrance, private bathroom, small kitchen area. You are free to come and go as you like. The only shared space is the meeting room near the library. Everything else remains professional. Charlotte looked around. I appreciate the clarity. There will be a notarized contract signed tomorrow morning. I understand. He paused at the door, then said something that almost surprised her. If at any point this makes you uncomfortable, you can walk away. Charlotte looked at him, and if it makes you uncomfortable, I do not get uncomfortable. The next day, they signed the papers, 2 witnesses from the legal team, a notary, no flowers, no ring, no vows, only signatures. When it was done, Graham closed the folder and stood. It is official. Charlotte nodded. Yes, it is. They shook hands. It was the first time they had touched. That night, Charlotte sat by the window in her new room. The rain whispered again. She sipped tea, listened to the silence, and wondered if somewhere, deep inside this cold agreement, a story had already begun. The first snowfall came earlier than expected. Charlotte opened the blinds in her bedroom and watched as flakes drifted down in slow spirals. The lawn outside had turned white, untouched. The whole street looked like it was holding its breath. She wrapped a sweater over her shoulders and made coffee in the small kitchen attached to her wing. The quiet filled every corner. It had been 3 weeks since they signed the marriage papers. 3 weeks of polite conversation, precise schedules, separate spaces. 3 weeks of learning how to live beside someone without touching them, without crossing any invisible lines. She saw Graham in the mornings. He read the news on a tablet while drinking black coffee. She would pass by and say, "Good morning." He always replied, "Morning." Nothing more. Some days, they drove to the office together in silence. Other days, she took her own car. Their routines aligned without effort, but never overlapped. At the office, they worked like before, professional, distant, efficient, but at night, when Charlotte returned to the quiet of the house, she found herself noticing the little things: the coat he left on the hook, perfectly straight, the tray of tea he set outside her door when she had a cough, the faint sound of a piano playing once from the room at the far end of the hallway. One evening, Charlotte came home later than usual. She had stayed to review reports. Snow had thickened. The road shimmered in icy blue. As she opened the front door, she saw Graham sitting in the main living room. A fire burned quietly. He held a book in his hands. He looked up. "You are late. I lost track of time. You did not text. I forgot." A pause. Then he said, "Next time, please let me know." It was not an order, not cold. Just something close to concern. She nodded. Understood. The next day, she left a note on the kitchen counter before heading out. It simply said, "Home late. Finishing proposal. Do not wait." When she came home, there was a small bowl of soup left warming in the slow cooker. No note, just the soup. The days passed like falling snow. Slow, gentle, quiet. Then came the storm. It was a Thursday. Charlotte received a phone call from an unknown number. She answered. A woman's voice. "Is this Charlotte Hale?" "Yes. I am calling from Cross Enterprises. Mr. Daniel Cross would like to meet with you. He will be in Seattle next week." Charlotte froze. She had not heard that name in months. She felt her hand tighten around the phone. "I am not interested." The woman hesitated. "He insists it is urgent," Charlotte repeated, more firmly. "I said no." She hung up. Her heart was racing. She sat still for a full minute. Then she stood and walked straight to the library. Graham was there, reviewing a draft. He looked up when she entered. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Go ahead." "If someone from my past tries to contact me through the company, can I ask that their access be blocked?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "Who contacted you?" "It does not matter." "It does." She folded her arms. "Daniel Cross." Silence fell. Graham set down the paper in his hand. "Has he harmed you?" "Not physically. But yes?" "In other ways." Graham stood. "I will make sure he does not reach you again." Charlotte gave a slow nod. "Thank you." She turned to leave. Before she closed the door, Graham spoke again. "I have read about what happened. The wedding, the scandal." Charlotte paused. I imagine most people have. I did not judge you for it. I know. She stepped out into the hallway, but something inside her had already shifted. That weekend, it snowed without stopping. Charlotte stayed home. She lit candles in her room, wrote in her notebook. At one point, she wandered into the kitchen and found Graham making tea. He handed her a mug. She held it in both hands. They stood at the counter in silence. Then she asked, "Do you ever regret not choosing something?" Simpler. Graham sipped his tea. Every day. She looked at him. He added, "But I do not believe simple things last. Quiet ones do." That night, as she lay in bed, Charlotte thought about what he said. Not simple, but quiet. Their marriage was not simple, but it had become something else. Predictable, stable, maybe even safe, and in a life that had once spun out of control under a cathedral ceiling. Safe was a kind of love, even if neither of them called it that. It started with a knock. Charlotte had just returned home from the office. Snow clung to the edge of her coat. Her hands were still cold as she set her keys on the table. Then came the knock again, firm, measured. Not the sound of a delivery. She opened the door slowly, and there he stood, Daniel Cross. His hair was shorter, his coat darker than she remembered, but his eyes, still that same color of regret she had memorized once. "Charlotte." She did not answer. "I was hoping you would talk to me." She stepped back, but did not open the door wider. "You are not supposed to be here. I know. How did you find me?" "I called your old assistant. He owed me a favor." Charlotte felt the air around her tighten. "I want you to leave. I just need 10 minutes. "Why?" He looked down, then up again. "Because I made a mistake." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "You made a choice, not a mistake. I was scared." She stepped forward, her voice calm, not angry. "Do you know what it felt like to stand there in front of 300 people and realize I had been abandoned?" His face changed. "I regret it every day. I do not care." He blinked. "I am married now." The words were not shouted, not dramatic, just delivered like a final sentence. Daniel went still. "To who?" "That is none of your business." He looked away. "You still wear your name?" "Yes, because I chose to keep it." He put his hands in his coat pockets. "I never stopped caring about you." Charlotte stepped out onto the porch, closed the door behind her. "I stopped caring the moment you ran." He looked at her for a long time. "I wanted to say sorry. Now you have." She turned to go back inside, then stopped. "I hope you find what you are looking for, but it is not here." She closed the door, locked it, and walked into the warmth of the quiet house. Graham came home later that evening. She was sitting by the fire with a book in her lap. He paused when he saw her expression. Someone came by. He walked over. "Who, Daniel?" He stayed silent. Charlotte looked into the fire. "I sent him away." "Good." That was all he said. But he walked into the kitchen and returned with tea, set it beside her, then sat down nearby, not too close, just enough. She sipped slowly, and for the first time since Daniel left her at the altar, she did not feel shaken. She felt steady, not because Graham had said anything special, but because he had not said too much, because he had stayed. Later that night, Charlotte stepped into the hallway and heard something unexpected, the sound of piano keys. She followed it, barefoot, past the main rooms. The music came from the study. The door was half open. Inside, Graham sat at an old upright piano, his back to the door, the melody soft, hesitant. It was not a song she knew, but it carried weight, like it belonged to something long buried. She stood quietly until he stopped playing. Then he spoke. I used to play for my mother. Charlotte stepped inside. You are good. I used to be better. He closed the piano lid gently. I have not touched it in years. She walked over. Why now? He looked at her. Because silence is not always peace. Sometimes it is armor. Charlotte sat on the bench beside him. I know that too well. They said nothing for a while. Then Graham spoke again. If he comes back, you do not owe him any more time. I know. And if you want him kept away legally or otherwise, I can arrange it. Charlotte turned to him. You do not have to protect me. He nodded. But I want to. The next morning, Charlotte opened her inbox. There was one message. No subject line, no name, only 5 words. I never meant to hurt you. She hovered over the delete button, then clicked it. Gone. At the office. She moved through tasks with more focus than usual, her hands steady, her voice calm, but something had shifted. Graham noticed. He stopped by her desk after lunch. You are different today. I feel different. He studied her face. Stronger. No, just lighter. That night, as snow fell again, Charlotte stood at the window of her room. She remembered everything. The aisle, the silence, the headlines, the flight across the country, the job, the man who had offered her safety, not affection, and somehow, now, gave her both. Not with promises, but with presence. Snow covered the city like a soft blanket of silence every morning. Charlotte would wipe frost from the windows. The glass felt colder now. The air outside sharper. Inside the house. The days began slowly. Graham no longer left before she woke. He often stayed in the kitchen longer than needed. Sometimes he asked how she slept. Sometimes she answered. Their words were still few, but the quiet between them had changed. It was no longer the absence of conversation. It had become presence. One Saturday, the power went out. A snowstorm had swept through Seattle overnight. Charlotte stood at the window, watching branches sway in the wind. Graham appeared behind her with a flashlight. No power. Lines are down, citywide. Charlotte turned. Will it be out long? Probably a day. Maybe more. She wrapped a blanket over her shoulders. He handed her a cup of warm water. The fireplace still works. They lit candles in the living room. The flames danced gently. Then they both sat on the floor, not facing each other, just sharing the warmth. Graham spoke first. I used to hate winter. Charlotte looked over. Why, he stared into the fire. It reminds me of endings. She thought for a moment. I used to love it. Snow made everything quiet, even the pain. He turned to her. But now, I am not sure. Graham nodded, then asked, Do you miss Chicago? Charlotte shook her head slowly. I miss who I thought I was. That silence returned. But now, it carried meaning. Later that night, Graham brought out a stack of old board games. Charlotte laughed softly. I never imagined you playing Scrabble. I do not. But tonight, I will. They played by candlelight. She won the first round. He won the second. By the third, they were laughing. Not loudly, but the kind that came from somewhere deep, as if laughter had not lived there for a while. The next day, the power returned. But something else had stayed behind. A comfort, a rhythm. One evening, Graham offered to drive her to the office instead of taking separate cars. She accepted. The next day, she cooked dinner, nothing elaborate, just soup and bread. They ate at the small table in the kitchen. Afterward, he did the dishes. No one mentioned the shift, but they both felt it. One evening, Charlotte sat in the library, reading. Graham entered quietly. He stood for a moment, then asked, "What are you reading?" "Letters from a war widow." He walked over. "She writes to someone who cannot answer." Charlotte looked up. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "That kind of love. It lingers." Charlotte closed the book gently. "I do not think it is just love. I think it is grief, turned soft." Graham sat across from her. "I never knew grief could soften. Sometimes it is the only way we can carry it." That night, as Charlotte walked past the study, she heard music again, piano. This time, she opened the door and entered. Graham looked up. He did not stop playing. She sat beside him on the bench. When the piece ended, he turned. "I used to play when I could not sleep. Do you sleep now?" He paused. "More than I used to." She looked down at the keys. "May I try something?" He moved his hands away. She pressed a few uncertain notes, then paused. "I never learned properly, just what my mother showed me." He watched her hands. "You remember well." She smiled. "It is the remembering that hurts sometimes." He did not answer, but his silence was full. On Sunday morning, they sat on the back porch with coffee. The snow had stopped. Sunlight bounced off the rooftops. Everything sparkled. Charlotte wrapped her hands around the cup. "I never thought I would feel this. Steady again." Graham looked over. "Is that how you feel now?" She nodded. "I do not know what to call it, but it feels quiet and safe." He said nothing, but his hand rested lightly on the porch railing, closer to hers than usual. Their fingers did not touch, but she could feel the nearness, and it was enough. That evening, Charlotte opened her notebook. She flipped past old pages, lists of things she had lost, things she wanted. Now, she began a new page. At the top, she wrote, "Things I did not expect to find. Safety and silence, warmth in winter, someone who lets me be myself." She stopped there, closed the notebook, and sat still in the soft light. The days grew longer, but the cold remained. Charlotte began waking before sunrise, not because of alarms, but because something inside her stirred earlier now. Each morning, she would make coffee and sit near the window. Sometimes, Graham would already be there. They did not speak much, but they always noticed each other. One morning, she entered the kitchen and found him placing a fresh croissant on a plate. He turned. "I went to the bakery you mentioned." She smiled. "They are only open before 8. I noticed." He poured her coffee without asking how she liked it, because by now, he knew. They began sharing meals more often. At first, in silence, then in fragments. "You had a call from Hong Kong today," she said once. He nodded. "They want to push the deal. I am not ready." Why? He looked at his glass. "Because I do not build fast." She understood. One night, she heard the sound of snow against her window. She walked through the quiet house and found Graham standing in the living room, looking outside. He did not turn, but he said, "Sometimes I wonder what this house would be like if it had been filled." Charlotte stepped closer. "Filled with what? Laughter? Arguments? Joy?" She looked at him. "Was it ever filled with love?" He took a moment, "Not the kind that lasts." She stood beside him. "It can still be filled." He looked at her, his eyes softer. "With whatever we choose." The next evening, they went for a walk. Snow crunched beneath their boots. The street was quiet. They passed houses with warm lights inside. Children's shadows danced behind curtains. They said nothing, but Charlotte felt a shift, not in words, but in step. He did not walk ahead. He walked beside her, and when her glove slipped slightly, he reached out, not to take her hand, but to adjust her sleeve. It was nothing, and it was everything. Later that week, Charlotte returned from the office early. She carried a small wrapped box. Inside was a pen, simple, silver, engraved with 3 words, "You listen well." She placed it on his desk, no note. That evening, Graham stepped into the library, holding the pen. He sat across from her. "You remembered?" "Yes." "I lost this exact model 5 years ago." "I know." He turned the pen in his fingers, then looked at her. "Why did you give this to me?" She met his gaze. "Because you give people space to speak, even when you do not." He held her eyes, then said quietly, "You make the silence feel safe." The next night, something small broke inside Charlotte. Not from pain, but from presence. She had a dream. In it, she was standing at the altar again, alone, but this time, no one watched. No cameras, no guests, only Graham, sitting quietly in the last row. When she woke, there were tears on her pillow. She stepped out into the hallway and saw his light still on. She walked toward his door, then stopped. She did not knock, but she stood there for a full minute, then returned to bed and slept. For the first time in months, she dreamed of something other than loss. On Friday, Graham canceled his meetings. He stood outside her office and said, "Come with me." She looked up, where he only said, "Out." They drove for almost an hour, past the city limits, into a quiet stretch of land where trees lined the horizon. He parked near a frozen lake. They stepped out. The air was sharp, the sky pale. Graham pointed to a bench near the edge of the ice. "My father brought me here once, before he died." Charlotte walked with him. They sat. He spoke slowly. "He told me that silence makes men strong." She looked out at the lake. "And what do you think now?" He turned to her. "I think silence can hide pain, but it can also hold peace." She nodded. They sat without words for a while. Then Graham spoke again. "Charlotte." She looked at him. "I know what we are. I know what we agreed to." She waited. "But every morning now feels less like a contract, and more like a beginning." Her breath caught. He did not reach for her hand. He did not move closer, but his voice trembled slightly. "I do not want to lose the quiet we have built, but I also do not want to mistake silence for distance." Charlotte whispered, "It is not distance." Graham looked away. "Then what is it?" She answered, "It is care, covered in quiet, wrapped in time." They returned home in the dark. She stepped out of the car first, walked into the kitchen. He followed. As she made tea, she turned. "Do you want to stay?" He looked confused. "Here, in the kitchen." "For tea." He nodded. "Of course." She placed 2 cups on the table, and they sat. No vows, no confessions, just warmth and presence. Spring came quietly. The snow melted. Buds formed on branches. The city, once cold and white, now shifted into soft greens and golds. Charlotte opened the windows each morning. The air felt new. One morning, Graham stood beside her, coffee in hand. He watched the light move across the floor. "This house feels different." Charlotte nodded. "It is. We are." He turned to her. "Your contract ends next week." She said nothing at first. Then, quietly, "I know." He waited, as if each second between them held more than words could. Finally, she asked, "Do you want it to end?" He looked down. "I want the contract to end." Then looked at her again. "But not the mornings. Not the coffee. Not you." They did not speak of it again for 2 days. But something shifted. Their steps were slower, their silences fuller, their glances lingered longer. One night, Charlotte walked past his study and saw the door open. Inside, Graham sat on the piano bench. He was not playing, just sitting, still. She stepped in quietly. "Can I sit with you?" He nodded. She sat beside him. Neither of them touched the keys. Then she asked, "Why do you hesitate?" Graham took a slow breath. "I have built everything with caution. Strategy, silence." He turned toward her. "But you taught me that sometimes silence is not about holding back. Sometimes it is about listening," Charlotte whispered. "And what do you hear now?" he answered. "Myself, for the first time." That Sunday, they went back to the lake, the same bench, the same view, but this time, the ice had melted. The water moved freely, clear, open. Charlotte brought a small thermos of tea. Graham brought a photo. He handed it to her. It was old, faded. His parents, younger than she expected. They looked stiff, formal. But in the corner of the photo, a boy Graham was smiling, genuine, free. "I forgot that version of myself existed," he said. She held the photo gently. "He is still here." Back at the house, Charlotte stood in her room. She looked around. The books she had arranged, the blanket she folded, the small tray by the window where she kept her keys. It had become a home, not just a room. She walked to the doorway and stood for a long moment, then stepped across the hall and knocked on his door. Graham opened it. His expression said everything. That night, they sat together on the same couch. No candles, no piano, just stillness and warmth. He reached for her hand. This time, she let him. Their fingers interlaced slowly, like a promise that did not need words. She leaned her head on his shoulder. For the first time, they were not filling the silence. They were living inside it. On the morning of the contract's end, Charlotte woke early. Graham was already in the kitchen. He handed her a cup of coffee. She took it, her hand brushing his. He looked at her. "No papers to sign today." She smiled. "No lawyers either." He set down his cup, then said, "Without rehearsal, I do not want to keep you because of a contract. I want to keep you because of the way this house breathes when you are in it, because of the sound your cup makes on the counter, because of how you make the quiet feel like home." Charlotte stood still. Then said, "I stayed because you never asked me to be someone else. Not once." Graham stepped closer. "You once asked me if this house had ever been filled with love." She nodded. He whispered, "It is now." They did not marry again. There was no new ceremony, no guests, no press. But she stayed, and he stayed. And the silence between them became something sacred. Years later, neighbors would say they were the quietest couple on the street. But every morning, lights turned on in sync, 2 cups of coffee, soft footsteps, laughter low, rare, but real. And on Sundays, piano music from the study, always 2 people, always side by side. They never spoke much in public, but their quiet said everything. One afternoon, Charlotte found her old notebook. She turned to the back page. She wrote, "We were not saved by grand gestures. We were saved by listening, by staying, by building a home in silence." She closed the book and placed it on the shelf. Next to a silver pen, sometimes, life does not fall apart loudly. It fades, quietly, like a door that closes without warning. But even in silence, healing can begin. This story reminds us that not all love begins with fireworks. Some love stories start in stillness, in trust earned slowly, in simple moments, like shared coffee or a quiet glance. For those of us who have known loss, a broken promise, a dream that slipped away, it is easy to believe that peace will never return. But maybe peace is not something we chase. Maybe it is something we build, one quiet choice at a time. This is not a lesson about romance. It is a lesson about presence, about listening, about staying, and about letting time soften the sharp edges of our past. So if your heart has grown tired, take comfort, because stillness is not the end. It can be the beginning of something deeply human. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like. Share it with someone who may need quiet comfort today. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more healing stories to life. We are grateful to have you here.